Welcome to yet another session of Dr. Spotfire. Your presenters for today would be Deviation Rajdev and myself, Vishakha Mujju. Learning is not driven by answers but by questions. Once again, we request you to send your questions with hashtag Dr. Spotfire on community.tipco.com. That's from where we take our questions. Now, this is going to be your crew. Myself, Dr. Vishakha Mujju, then I have my data scientist, Deviation Rajdev, and she will be presenting today's featured session. And then we have our campaign coordinator, Anna Aprenko. We are all based out of Palo Alto. With this, I will hand over to Deviation Rajdev for today's featured session. So she will be presenting today's featured session.
Hi everyone, I'm DJ. Today we'll be talking about effective bar graphs. So to start with, this essentially is a DXP that follows the community post that just went live with the same content but in more detail. A lot of times it's extremely useful to follow along step by step with everything that's written in an article. So that's what I'm trying to do here. The reason we're even talking about this is because data visualization has grown by leaps and bounds within the past few years, with everyone understanding that visual perception has a greater bandwidth than verbal perception, reading, hearing, etc. So to start with, we'll go through common types of bar charts. This is the most basic of visualization types, but you'll quickly see how powerful it can be. So the first type is actually a histogram. It is a discretized representation of continuous data. In Spotfire, you can actually see that if I go to data panel, I can see the histogram and I can also see measures associated with it. If I click on it, it inserts it into my visualization as such. And then moving on, you can see that within this, let me just grab that and fix it, move it to a corner where I actually want it. So if you look at it, the default number of bins are 20. Now with 20 bins, the granularity is going to be a little bit low. So if you increase the number of bins, you'll be able to see more of these peaks come up. So when working with histograms, especially if you're using Spotfire or similar software, it's very important to go in and vary the width in order to uncover some patterns that you might have otherwise missed out. So moving on from a histogram, we've got a vertical bar chart. Now, a vertical bar chart can, in most cases, successfully replace a pie chart. I've given you an example of both a pie chart and a vertical bar graph over here. And as you quickly see that this is more interpretable than this, because over here you have to look at the sector, then you have to look at the label, and then you have to look at the proportion, because the human mind finds it difficult perceptually to figure out these proportions. So it's much easier to go with a bar chart. And right now I have labeled it in terms of absolute values. If I go in, I can show percentages as well. So actually that would be for this. And we'll see an example of this sort of labeling in the next chart. So while we're still here, a lot of times for categorical types of x-axis, it might be better to display the chart as a horizontal bar chart instead of a vertical one. The reason for that is that it mimics the natural reading order of most Indo-European languages, including English. So it would be faster for someone to read a horizontal bar chart versus a vertical one. Just to show you that, here is a representation of a horizontal bar chart, and you can immediately see how from the pie chart, we've come a long way in terms of ease of readability when we go to a horizontal bar chart. The other types are stacked bar charts. So if you have tall type of data where one data column has more categories within it, you can use this type of bar chart. In the previous examples, we saw where variables were encoded in X and Y. Here you can have another variable encoding through the stacks that can be differentiated through the color. So over here I have year 2012 and year 2013. I'm not getting into the actual data itself. If you want details about that or if you want sources, please check out the blog entry. It has citations and data references for everything that I talk about. So moving on to these stacks, you can see how the 2 years are differentiated. So now I've got a numeric column, I've got a categorical column, and within the numeric column, I've got a path to whole sort of a division. But you can also see some of the shortcomings of this. So for example, this is an unbalanced category where the values are much lower than the other values. So it's difficult to discern the proportion of categories within this. For that, we recommend using 100% stacked bar charts. But these are better than pie charts and really good with unbalanced classes, which is a shortcoming of pie charts. So if your sectors get too small, the readability drops down drastically. But at the same time, it's important to remember that this is also not an end-all solution. So if your number of subcategories increases, this will not be a good visualization. We'll see what you can do if you have more categories as we move forward in this article. But before, I just want to show you the same thing that I was showing you previously with the percentages now displayed over here. It's very easy to change the fonts as well. So if I just go to fonts and if I go to bar chart labels, I can increase the size and you'll see the labels increasing, you see the actual values increasing and so on. So that's where you configure that from. And then the last type of bar chart is side-by-side bar chart. So these are core categories. You saw that the previous stacked bar chart now has more categories, so now you can't immediately discern the comparison between each of these individuals. And for that, what I've done is represented it as a side-by-side with the labels. This is much more better than the stacked bar chart. In order to actually change this configuration, I don't have to do a lot. I just have to click on my categorical axis and just switch it out using the short access labels. In the newer versions of Spotfire, all of the visualizations have really handy access menus, so you should definitely try and explore them as much as possible. So having covered the main types of bar charts, there are several add-ons that you can do to the existing types in order to make them represent the data better. The first of that would be sorting. So over here, this is actually real Australia coffee retail purchase data, hot beverage retail purchase data. And because this is real data, you can see it's really bad. The categories are not mentioned. It's all over the place. So what I'm going to do is if I go to my menu, I am going to add a zoom slider. And then I'm going to narrow down to the number of categories that are actually readable. So the moment I start to see labels for all of them, I'm going to stop. And then let's sort bars by value. and you can immediately see that it automatically sorts it in reverse order for me. And the moment we get this visualization in, you can see there's a bunch of empty values. If I go into my data panel, I can replace them. But as you see, the most popular beverage is just normal tea or normal coffee. And then about at halfway mark of that, or 60% mark of that, you've got chocolate flavor that comes in. So these are just 3 related to sorting, ordering that can drastically increase the readability of a graph. The second one that I want to talk about is trellis. So I've got 5 products here, 4 core products, and the 5th one is a combined category. Now, if I represented it side by side within the same graph, it would be a hindrance to compare one against the other. So I'm using row-wise or panels in my trellis to actually get this kind of a graph. You can also see that I have used a pretty standard categorical color scheme over here. It's a blue to green shade. But if I wanted to highlight a particular product, I could go in and color that differently from the rest. So let me just duplicate this visualization very quickly and change the color scheme. So within colors, this is my default color scheme. I'm going to pick from file. So you're actually able to save all of these color schemes as files and then reuse them. So I saved a color scheme that I had created, and I will apply it to my match values. And now you can see the entire emphasis comes on product 2. Why would you need to do that? Because let's say you're the owner of product 2, and now you need to compare it with the rest of your competitors. So you can see the closest one is product 1, and even though it's in the background, it's a much lighter color, the transparency is much higher. But you can see that this is the closest competitor, and as we move on to the others category, the color fades to give you the notion that it's not so important. We can talk a lot more about color theory, but that's probably going to be an article of its own. Still, if you want me to elaborate on anything that I have covered so far within this, definitely leave me a note. The fourth thing that we get to is just bar graphs. So bar graphs are a really clever connotation for bar and arc graphs combined. A lot of times when we consider circular displays, the readability is hindered by you can concentrate on the actual length of the arc. You can concentrate on the area that it fills in a pie chart. You can also concentrate on the sector. So a lot of people, when they're looking at length instead of the circular length, they look at the perpendicular sector length, and that can be quite confusing. So in order to avoid confusions like that, if in some applications you still have to use circular graphs, we recommend using modifications similar to the two that we've shown. The biggest one is using modified grid lines. So over here, instead of a full circle, which is difficult to perceive, we've reduced it to a half circle. So that takes away some of the complexity. In this one, we've added panels, which are essentially just modified grid lines for each of these. And then, of course, the color encoding, which immediately gives you a quantitative idea, contrast idea, and the absolute KPI along with the title, along with the scales being very, very clearly demarcated. So if you have to use circular visualization, this would be an ideal way to go about it. Some examples of where circular visualizations are used a lot are in manufacturing. So your factory supervisor would be very accustomed to seeing labels on the power gauges of the equipment, so it's a good idea to mimic his natural perception by using gauge charts. Both of these examples have been created using JavaScript visualization framework, JSViz, within Spotfire. You could download and explore examples of the same to see examples of donut charts, etc. Then other variants of bar charts that are very useful. The first one is bullet chart. This is one of the most underrated visualizations. It was originally implemented or invented by Stephen Pugh, and it helps compare a measure against a benchmark. So in this particular visualization, my measure is the value in blue, which is my product 1, and the benchmark is the red tick mark. So that's the sale of my product 2. If you remember this graph from before, product 1 and product 2, so the little bit of distance versus the closeness, it's the same thing, but now it's represented in this format. Why would you want to do this versus a side-by-side or a trellis? It depends on the other data that you're viewing in comparison with it. So on the trellis, if I put up labels about absolute differences, it would get quite distracting. So because I want to see more data in conjunction with this, I am using a bullet graph. You can also take the gray solid background and convert it into further gradients. I would generally advise against that because it leads to some distraction, but it is possible. This visualization comes from the graphical table in Spotfire. If I show you the properties, this is a graphical table. And then in the axes, you can see both the columns that I have added. So those are essentially the axes. And both of these can be configured independent of each other. So if I go in and show you the settings of this, you can see that my value comes from the difference between the two. And I've given you the data reference. It's totally cool that you looked at what the data columns were. That's about it. You can add a lot more. So if I wanted to add a bullet graph of another category or a spark line or another calculated value, I could just quickly right-click on it and do that. In the original blog entry, there are references that tell you more about bullet graphs, that tell you how to configure them within Spotfire and also how to use your graphical tables better. Next, we move on to deviation bar graphs. So normal bar graphs, if I explain the business case here, these are distribution centers and these are the number of deliveries that they have to make. So think of these as restaurants on some company like Yelp or Uber or Grubhub or any of these food startups and established companies. And these are the number of deliveries that they have to make, let's say, in the next hour or within the day. But there's a recommended capacity for them, and this is what the line represents at 25. Now, if I give you this graph as it is, the onus comes on you to calculate mentally which groups are above capacity, which groups are below capacity, and by how much. So just by shifting the origin to an absolute 0, I've been able to take away some of that complexity from the user. I can further go and sort it, but I wanted a custom sort order, so I haven't sorted it, but that's also an option. In order to see how easy it is to actually just get that deviation, get that centering, I've subtracted the static value of 25, but if this was coming from a document property, you could just insert a document property and subtract that. So it's completely dynamic and very interactive. The next variation that I want to talk about is a waterfall chart. So in a bar graph, your eyes are drawn to the absolute value. So you're always looking at the length of it. Now, what about the length of one group compared against the length of another group? We saw one visualization that helps you do that. Let's say a bullet graph, but a bullet graph is ideal for pairwise comparisons. If you're doing more than pairwise comparisons, waterfall charts are a good alternative. So I'll go in, switch visualization to waterfall chart, and you can see how immediately this Spotfire picks up all of the different values and it's able to stagger them along. So these are the individual bar lengths, and this is the cumulative total that goes in and creates a grand total column. So a waterfall chart has two broad uses. The first usage is to show like this how different categories of factors contribute to a whole. But the second use could also be how much does one category differ from another category. So if I go in and show my scale selector, and instead of the row count, I use another column and I use some other kind of let's say a difference on it or any of these, I would see how one category differs from another category. So we've looked at bar graphs, some good configurations for it, some variants of it, and these are not all the variants. If you go to the visualization community page, and I will send out a link for that on the chat, you can see that there are many variations which are very useful. So there are Pareto graphs, there are Gantt charts. All of that are configurations that would be extremely useful to know and understand when to apply and how to do. Finally, we come down to what are some of the configuration mistakes that people make when creating these bar graphs, or just when creating any kind of chart, not just bar graph. So I've taken the example of line charts over here because you'll understand it the fastest from a line chart, but I could just as easily show you this for a bar chart, etc. The first thing is dual y-axes. So always keep this graph as a reference, and I'll just go in and change this one to show you what I'm talking about. If I go to y-axis, change it to multiple scales, and show the scale labels, you can now see that this intersection point on the right lies between 640,000 and 650,000, but on the left it lies between 620,000 and 630,000. So that's a pure configuration error, and we just recommend to not use dual y-axes because it can lead to confusions like that. I think you should also be able to see this if I switch it to a bar chart. So some of the things that seem very, very equal, like this. This is 661,000 and this is 649,000. So just because I have dual axes, now 649 looks larger than 661. So it can lead to a whole lot of chaos, and we do not recommend using this in any chart. However, sometimes people do use dual y-axes when they're showing a percent against an absolute value. So if instead of both of these being absolute numbers, if one of them was percent, it would be okay, yet not recommended to use dual axes. The second thing that I want to highlight is see the difference between these two lines. Now it's very easy to notice that my origin actually does not start at 0. So let's go and fix that by adding 0 to the y-axis. And you can immediately see how the exaggerated difference between the two lines has reduced. So when you're looking at the pattern of one line, it's okay to look at it in isolation without the reference point, but the moment you get down to a comparison, if you compare two values without actually looking at a common reference point for both, which is like 0, the pattern that it creates will be highly exaggerated. That's the second one. And the third one is chart junk. So you can see that all of my visualizations are very clean. They don't have any unnecessary components. Chart junk are just configurations that are on your visualization page, but they do not help you in understanding the visualization any better. So let's go in and add all possible elements that we possibly can, and you'll see how quickly not only is your area compromised, but also your readability decreases. That is, now I just have, and a lot of these by default will be turned on because we don't want the user to miss out on a factor that the user should be aware of. But it's like compare this graph and compare this graph. There is much less distraction over here. So that's what we mean when we say reduce chart junk. We've looked at all these cases about when to use bar charts and how to vary them to get the maximum utility out of it, but it's also important to consider when not to use them at all. So 3 examples that we can think about are unequal intervals in time. If I show you this bar chart, you can see a lot of the values are missing, but visually it still looks like a good periodicity going on. Whereas the moment I convert it into a line graph and I show you the markers, you can see that the periodicity is not as regular as it is perceived from this graph. So every time you're looking at patterns, it's good to use some form of a line graph. The second is trends in time. So this is a time trend, especially if there are values missing. There's a function, there's an option in Spotfire that lets you compensate for missing X values in order to space it out equally. I don't have any, so I don't have that option. And then this also helps you improve the data to ink ratio. So if I minimize this graph, this one makes your page look extremely full without actually having that much information in it. But when you look at this one, this helps you gauge the pattern, but also does not clutter up your page. So data to ink ratio is one of Tufti's great principles, and we stand by it under most cases. The third thing is showing change from one benchmark to the other. So slope graphs are recommended. There are multiple ways to configure slope graphs in Spotfire, and that's probably an article of its own, so I will refrain from getting into details for that. But as a rule of thumb, it's good to remember that if there are one column of categories and you're showing change, let's say from 2007 to 2013, it's good to just use a slope graph. Then in summary, if you want us to go into details of any of these, go over configurations or show you how to configure the different ones in more detail, definitely reach out through the normal Dr. Spotfire methods, either through the hashtag or by posting your question on community. And if you have data that's proprietary, you can send us an email. And then also check out the visual design best practices. So this was the entire discussion was from a viewpoint of information visualization. But there are several pure design considerations and aesthetics that elevate your dashboard. So the visual design best practices page would be a better landing spot for that discussion. That's it from my side. Over to you, Vishaka.
Thank you, DJ, for this wonderful presentation. Let me go ahead and start the QA. can you give me the presenter? Thank you. So let me go ahead and start today's session. So what I have here is I have today some questions as a follow-up from our last time Dr. Spotfire session, where we kind of had few questions, and there are some questions from community which kind of match the same thing. So let me pick up that question first. So this is the question from the last time, where we kind of had a solution where we wanted two multiple x-axis, and instead of using multiple x-axis, we merged the data, especially with the dates, and that's where we kind of picked it. So same thing, in this case, we had another question in our support where we wanted to use the data, but the solution was not merging data. So in this case, we had this query on support where the customer had a T1 table with IDs and some dates and value for oil and information about field. And the customer has another data table with again value for ID and future date and field. But in this case, the value is for gas. So it's one of the measures is oil measure table, another measure is the gas measure table. Again, the way customer wants it, in this case, this is the gas one, and the customer also wants to kind of have oil one on top of it. But in this case, what happens is because the dates are different. So when the oil production is happening at the same time, the gas production is not happening. So these are two different dates. So what we can do is we can merge this data, but in this case, the date column has to be common. So what I can do is there is something called as insert rows. So, and I don't need, if the both tables are from the same data set, I don't need, I would insert rows to table 2. I would select table 1. So I have table 1 and table 2. So I will select table 1. And then I would say, okay, I want to insert rows, I match all possible. So you can see ID and field match, but I would also match the future date and the out date because I need a single date column. So I would match these. Now, the point is I don't want to actually merge them. I would keep extra column as oil. So for all the gas values, the oil field will be empty. For all the oil values, the gas field will be empty. And I would add this origin of new rows, which will help me understand which dates belong to historic. And I can call it, say, source. And I can say value for new one is basically my future dates, or it may be my historic dates. So I might call it future dates, and these are the historic dates. So I have both of them. So I have a way to kind of look at what dates belong where, and I would click finish. And then what I will do is I will color my values by this source. So what I can do is I'm kind of coloring these values by source, and I have future and I have the historic dates, and I have these date columns combined. And if I go to columns, what I will have is I have oil values and I have these values also. And then I will add this oil as separate. So I have oil as well as I have these values. Let me give it a little brighter color. So you can see, what I can see is I see both the columns coming from the same data table, yet they have their own kind of existence where I'm not combining these two. I'm seeing oil values here, which is my historic data, and I'm seeing these future gas values here together in one, and this date axis is same because I have combined the date column together, having both future as well as historic dates. But this source is which kind of differentiates what is historic, what is kind of future, and I'm able to see both the lines on the same line chart and still have the same data access. Now, this was a question which came as a follow-up on support, and it was something which we discussed in Dr. Spotfire, but in that case, we used insert columns. So how you want to merge data, we also use transformations. So depending on what is your visualization requirement, you can kind of either have insert columns, do transformation, or maybe insert rows. So again, it depends on how I want to represent my final data, and that would kind of decide what kind of data merging I would apply. Now, then there was another question we had. So let me kind of go ahead. It was about exporting PDF. So next question we had was how we can export PDF. So what we can do is, this is Spotfire 7.10. So there has been a quite of so we are able to kind of have enhanced PDF export in 7.10. So if I go to PDF, this option where I'm exporting to PDF, I would have multiple set of options. So I'm able to kind of select my layout. I'm able to kind of view, kind of decide what I want. I'm able to preview things. So it's not only a simple export where there were not many controls which were available to me. I have more controls available, and that kind of makes PDF export much usable. I think it's because of WebEx I have slow performance here. Yeah, so it's because of WebEx I have slow performance here. So what I can export is I can export all pages. I can export specific pages, active visualization. I can specify my paper size. I can specify my orientation. Now this was something which was already there, but these things like proportions. Do I want to fit it into my screen, fit it to PDF? I want to zoom out or zoom in. I have more settings here where I can specify margins, whether narrow, wide. I can specify the image quality as well. So this is something which has been added in 7.10, and the good thing what I like about is I'm able to preview everything. I'm able to see multiple pages. Now in the laptop I'm using, I have some kind of memory issue. That's why it is slow. Whereas when you will use it, it kind of shows up quickly. So this would be about PDF export. Then there is another thing which is specific in 7.10 is these markers, where I can add a rotation to them. So what I have done here is, based on another column, you could specify the degree, the angle by which your markers can kind of rotate. This is again new thing in Spotfire 7.10, where you could you have in a marker layer you have additional rotation option. So what you can do is you can specify the rotation. So let me go to properties. Let me go to layers, and this is something for the marker layer. So let me pick up a marker layer. So this tab here, rotation, where I have used rank to kind of rotate in degrees. You can rotate clockwise or anti-clockwise, or you could use some other values to kind of specify whether you want counterclockwise rotation. It would be like a very good visual practice to see things rotated based on, and the marker shape has been selected from here. Now, if I use circle, I may not be able to see the rotation. So depending on what marker type I am using, and I would kind of use arrows only. So if I'm using up arrow, that would be another thing which would decide how much you want to rotate. So this angle is always kind of in degrees. So you are using a column to rotate that angle by degrees, and that particular column could be a calculation based on your data. Another new feature in Spotfire 7.10 would be about cross tables, where if we have a cross table with hierarchy. So if I have a cross table with hierarchy and there are multiple hierarchies, it was difficult to kind of scroll through the data. Now what we have is a new thing called as horizontal scrolling. So you can freeze row headers. I had seen this kind of coming a lot where customers would ask for freezing row headers. So you can freeze the row headers. You can scroll row headers and you can adjust automatically. So this kind of gives us option for horizontal scrolling in cross tables. So this has been kind of added to and there are other things which have been added in 7.10. So what I would do is I would share this link where we have kind of this community link where we have what is new in Spotfire 7.10. This community link also shows you what has been added in earlier versions. So it's like a one place to see what has been kind of added to different versions. So I would kind of have this on the chat panel so that you can kind of go through what has been in earlier versions as well. So then next question I would take up is, this is another question which has come on to support, and I found multiple community questions belonging to this, where one of the questions is, Spotfire should change table source based on a button click, filtering different time periods. So the common thing in all these questions was that it can be done via script, but when we received this question on support, the requirement was we want to achieve this, but we don't want any script. So there is a solution already here where there is a script here where you can kind of change the table source based on a script, or maybe change visualization properties based on the script. But what I have here is, let me show you what I have done here is, so in this case, the customer has two tables, T1 and T2. In T1, so let me select when nothing is selected. So when these are the two tables. So one of the tables, so this is ID, they have names, and then there is a table 2 which tells about ID, what both types are there. Now there is a merge table which combines these two tables also. But not focusing on the data, the requirement is that this top visualization should be based on table 2 when nothing is selected. And when something is selected, it should kind of change to table 1. So this visualization either should be by table 2, either should be by table 1. And not only the visualization source changes, when you switch between two tables, these x-axis and y-axis change. So right now we can see that each boat and jet boat is what are the number in 2015, what are the number in 2016. When my source is T1, I don't have this information. I want to depict something else. Now in this case, I have two buttons, and I can select this one where I have select filter. So I can select each kind of location, and you can see at the top visualization, I see what is the total for that particular location. And this is from new table created. And when I select the top button, which I say when nothing selected, then the top visualization is created by a different table, which is table 2, and it has different X and Y axis. So, and another thing I have is, when I select filter by name and I click on this button, not only the top visualization changes, I also see a filtering option here which will help me select Charleston, Fremont, PA, and so on. And you can see the visualization changes. Now, in this case, I am not using scripts at all. What I am using is bookmarks. So if I go to, I edit this text area. So let me show you, I have these two buttons, and I have this as a simple filter coming from the data itself. So using this option here, insert filter, this filter has been inserted. I have two buttons, and if I edit a controller button, all it has is a bookmark, which is a public bookmark called T2 display. So I have two bookmarks, T2 display and new table display. So what I do is I configure my visualizations, I configure my text area, I configure everything, what I want to see, and then save it as a bookmark. In another case, I change it to new table display, I configure everything, I change visualization properties, and save it as that. So in a bookmark, Not only I'm saving filter settings, I'm also saving filter organization, marking, plot properties. So there's a lot which is inside this bookmark. And what I can do is I can also apply bookmarks in top bottom order. So if there were multiple things which I wanted to do, like apply filtering or do some changes, I would apply those here. But in this case, my requirement was simple, to create 2 bookmarks with my set of configuration. Now, another thing which was here was I wanted this filter box to appear and not appear based on the bookmark. So what we have is, whenever you have a text area, there is a checkbox here, include configuration in bookmark. So what happens if your text area has a filter in one bookmark and in another bookmark it does not have filter? If I check, the text area configuration will also be saved. And that's how I was able to kind of add this. So the moment I click the top bookmark, when nothing is selected, I don't see the filter, because that filter configuration was not there when this bookmark was created. And when I select filter by name, since the filtering was there, I am able to kind of see that in this bookmark. So let me show you one update to that bookmark. So if I view my bookmarks, and right now I have this configuration checked, and what I would do is I will edit this bookmark and kind of just add a simple filter, one more filter. So let me add a filter, and let me just add a filter of name or ID. So I have one filter of ID, and I will save this. So what I want to show you is that this would be saved in whichever I update. So if I view my bookmarks and I kind of, let me see my bookmarks, I kind of, right now it is selecting filter by name, it is new table display. Let me update this bookmark. So what I will do is I will update this bookmark. Now, when I have updated this new table, this bookmark, which is now this view where there should be 2 filters, and then if I go back here, I should not see. What happened is I kind of applied the bookmark first, and then I kind of selected it. That's why you don't see the filter here. So while we are saving that bookmark, whatever would be the view, that would be kind of saved there. So going back to my questions, what we had here is, so we had this particular thing where we wanted to kind of have 2 date columns. Then we had another question which was changing to data source at a click of button. So if you want to use script, that is kind of possible, but if you want to use bookmarks, that is also possible. You can kind of have the same thing applied with the help of bookmarks, where they can help you change the data source as well as visualization properties. Again, whatever you save at the time of bookmark, and when you are sharing, you have to make those bookmarks public. Then the next question I have is about OSIPy. So this has been kind of a regular question on Dr. Spotfire. We have earlier also covered it, and we're planning to have a featured session on it, that whether we can connect to OSIPy data source or not. Yes, you can connect to OSIPy data source. So let me show you. I have this version where I have this installed. So there is a OSIPy connector which you have to kind of download from community, which is available free. In earlier sessions of Dr. Spotfire, we have regularly shown you that it could be kind of installed. Once you have that installed and you want to pick up OSIPy tag list from your server, you just click on that link. You apply your server credentials, and your OSIPy administrator will tell you which authentication mode you are using, and you connect to that. Once you connect to the server, whatever tags you want to pick whatever point sources you want to pick, if there are specific data types you are looking at, if there are maximum number of tags, if there are particular attributes, you will be able to kind of see that. And once you click on that, in this case, I'm getting only the tag list, so I can click OK. And it is actually connecting to my live OSIPy server and getting all the tags from that server into my Spotfire analysis. So every time it is connected to source, every time I open this file, this data would be automatically refreshed, and I would be able to see that tag list here. Any questions while this is loading? So this would be all the questions we have for this week. So I will just wait for this to load, and you will be able to see data coming from OSIPy. So we have 100 tags here. So the data which is coming from OSIPy is 75 columns and 100 tags. And we will be able to see all the tags. So not only we are able to see all the tags, we also are able to kind of get the detailed drill down from tag data or asset framework or event frames. So we have all these options, and we can also, like from our product called Spotfire TIBCO Streambase, we can also kind of have data into Live Data Mart, and we can also get data from Live Data Mart as well. So there could be multiple ways of getting a live streaming data. In Spotfire, it will be always where you are pulling the data, whereas in Streambase, you can even push or you can even subscribe to the tags. So that way you would be able to see OSIPy data coming into Spotfire. Any questions before we close our session? So that would be all for today.
Thank you, everyone. Definitely check out the blogs and the links that are there in the chat.